Should you be wearing barefoot shoes? On this week's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, we are exploring the pros and cons of barefoot shoes and guiding you on whether or not that's something that you want to explore for yourself. We're going to cue our introduction and we're going to dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Exercise for Life Studios and Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset. And the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And this week we are discussing barefoot shoes. I feel like since early 2010s, around that time, like barefoot shoes have been really popular, and I don't really feel like their popularity has slowed down all that much. Maybe there aren't as many variations coming out as there once were, but I feel like at least for people that are into barefoot shoes, they are very much a staple within my world and within a lot of people's world that I interact with. And so we want to talk about them because for a lot of people, barefoot shoes are also something that they have heard about. They may be on their radar, and they don't really know exactly what to do about them. In fact, I feel like a lot of questions I get are around shoe wear and what kind of shoes people should be wearing. So we kind of want to give some pros and cons and our 2 cents on the barefoot shoes today.
That's right. And, it seems like if we were to say like, oh, what shoe should you wear? That should be like a pretty straightforward answer. Mm-hmm. But it's actually kind of like saying, hey, Julie and Charlie, what kind of workouts should I do? Where it really depends on like, where's your body today and what have you been doing with your body? So it's actually not as black and white as people think. It's not like going to get an assessment at a running store and this is the magical shoe that matches now the foot because we watched how you walked, and so this is the matching shoe to go with your foot. It's a little bit more complex than that, and the cool thing is it's something you can actually change. Like the ideal footwear for you, whether that's a barefoot shoe or whether it's not, can change over time. If you are interested in doing that, we'll talk about that a little bit. But let's talk about what is a barefoot shoe. So in general, a barefoot shoe, or sometimes you might hear the word like a zero drop or a minimalist shoe. This is all trying to make it so that your shoe is mimicking what it would be like if you were to walk barefoot, except for there's something so that if you step on a rock, it's going to cut your foot open, right? So there's still like that barrier, but it's trying not to do anything else to your foot, right? So it's trying to get this natural or normal movement. I hate the word natural because you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, well, what is that exactly?
Overused.
It's overused, but it's trying to respect the normal or the natural movement pattern that your foot would do, but with the protection of a shoe so that, you're not getting like cuts and scrapes and all that. But it's trying to be as most like barefoot as possible when you're wearing the shoe.
Exactly, and this doesn't necessarily mean that it's the toe shoes, like the shoes that have all the little different compartments for every toe. I've owned multiple pairs of those, by the way, so I'm not knocking them. But I'm just saying that while those may fall into like the barefoot or minimalist shoe category, it doesn't mean it's just those. I wear barefoot minimalist shoes right now, and they look like regular shoes. In my opinion, they look like regular shoes. Somebody else might think they don't. But there are barefoot minimalist shoes that actually look like real shoes, not like bare feet or toe socks or anything like that. Okay, so I want to clarify that. But the thing that is different about barefoot shoes, Julie, you nailed it on the head, is it's not forcing or restricting emotion on your foot. Okay, that's one of the big things. It's not forcing your foot to be in a specific position. It's not preventing your foot from pronating. It's not keeping your foot, with this rigid arch. There are also very, very little cushion or support kind of between, like stuff material between your foot and the ground, which has a lot of pros and cons that come with it. There's very little pitch or no pitch to the heel, meaning there's no like lift up of the heel. Where the heel and the toes are is essentially flat, or as flat as it can be. And so in a lot of ways, it is the exact opposite of how many shoes, especially like athletic, fitness, workout training shoes are built. You look at, popular running shoes, popular workout shoes. A lot of them have a lot of cushion, a lot of support, a lot of structure to them. You look at these shoes that people say, oh, these are good for your feet kind of shoes, often very rigid, very structured, a lot of support. I'm not going to name any brands or anything like that, but there are some very, very popular ones that it seems like when people are thinking of, oh, these are shoes that I want to wear in order to make sure that my feet feel good and feel healthy, like it always comes back to these brands. And a lot of shoe models with those brands are the complete opposite of the minimalist shoe style, the barefoot shoe style. And again, we're not saying this necessarily good or bad. Today we are exploring the barefoot shoes, and we're going to give you the pros of them and a lot of the cons that we see of barefoot shoes as well. But just to kind of paint the picture in everybody's mind, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a barefoot minimalist type shoe.
Great. So we're going to invite you into this conversation, whether we said barefoot shoe and you immediately thought, oh, that must be bad because support is good, or if you heard barefoot shoe and you thought, oh, that must be good because our feet should move really naturally whether they're in a shoe or not. We want to invite both extremes into this conversation because we want to break this down and talk about foot mechanics and how that's relating to your shoe and how this barefoot shoe movement or the barefoot shoe opportunities might benefit you, might not be great for you. So we hope that you can hear this message, whatever side that you've been, I guess I don't want to say groomed onto, but has been exposed to and what you agree with more. So here's some pros of a barefoot shoe is that our feet do move when we walk, and a barefoot shoe strives to respect that. So a barefoot shoe is trying not to manipulate your foot motion outside of what it would have normally done without a shoe on. So that's pretty cool. It also allows your toes to do their thing. We don't often think about toes when we think about our feet, I think, except for like getting pedicures. But when you walk, your toes have a really big contributory part to it, and a lot of non-barefoot shoes kind of restrict that. So the cool thing with barefoot shoes is that you'll probably look down and like my mom always said that they look like duck shoes because they're like so wide in the front, and she's like used to seeing like a nice narrow petite little foot. But anyways, you'll notice they're kind of wider, so they're going to allow your toes to spread and do their thing, which definitely promotes like healthy foot mechanics if your foot is able to handle that.
Another thing that the barefoot shoes can allow for, they can allow your feet to get stronger because you're going to be using the muscles of your feet in different ways than you would if you were wearing shoes that were more supported, more structured, thicker soles, things like that. And so while you use those muscles of your feet in those ways, it can help those muscles get stronger. There's a big caveat to that, which we're going to get to in kind of the cons section and later on in this episode, but it does provide a potential opportunity for your feet to get stronger simply by doing what you normally do in your life, but wearing these barefoot shoes. Another neat aspect is it can help your feet and your body overall kind of feel the ground better, okay? And so why this is important is because when it comes to like balance, when it comes to awareness of your body and being able to control your body, having feet that can feel the ground, can sense the ground, can, detect little changes in the level of the ground. If you're stepping on something, if you're not, if the ground's completely flat, if there's a little bit of curve to the ground, the different surfaces you might be stepping on, grass, cement, carpet, whatever, that should be sending different information to your body and to the rest of your muscles about how to control and position and balance your body. And a lot of times with shoes that have really thick soles or really stiff soles that don't allow you to feel the ground as much, you're not getting that type of information, to the muscles that control your knees, to the muscles that control your hips, to the muscles that control your spine, and all the way up your body. And so from a balance perspective, you're like literally not learning how to use your muscles in order to balance and position your body when you are not receiving that information. So you're not learning that skill as much as you could be. And there are different aspects of balance aside from just learning the skill, but that is one thing of like being able to feel what's going on beneath your feet and then adjust the rest of your body accordingly. And because the barefoot shoes have the thinner soles with them, that's going to allow more of that information to be perceived by your body and then your body to adjust accordingly.
That's right. And a lot of those points, Charlie, takes us into our cons list. So what are the negatives of wearing like a barefoot shoe? And the first one I think speaks to the pro of having a non-barefoot shoe, like a really supportive shoe, is that your feet might be too weak. And you're probably like, what do you mean my feet are too weak? Well, there are so many muscles in your feet, so many, and they need to be strong for your body and your feet to be able to handle not having support. So a lot of people are like, well, I think I should wear a supported shoe because remember, we have arch supports that need to be supported. We're not saying your arch shouldn't be supported. We're just saying that, hey, there's actually muscles that are supposed to be strong and supporting these arches in your feet. And when those muscles are too weak, that's when a barefoot shoe doesn't feel so hot on people's feet. Like they're like, oh, well, when I wear a barefoot shoe, it feels bad. How can barefoot shoes be good? Well, the issue isn't the shoe generally. The issue is the conditioning and the state of your muscles. But don't worry, we're not saying that you are weak or it's your fault, because actually our whole society is like teaching us to use external supports, i.e. shoes with squish in them, shoes with supports in them, shoes with orthotics in them. From a very young age, we have little kids, and almost every shoe that we see on the market, we choose to not put our kid in. Like we go to Target and I'm like, I can't even find any shoes that I like for my kid. So anyways, our feet from a very young age are being taught to become more and more deconditioned and weak because of the shoe wear or the footwear we decide to put on our kids, and what we do put on our kids. Anyways, that just keeps escalating. So a lot of adults, a lot of people in general have very, very weak feet that can't support the structures of their feet. And so that can be a negative of a barefoot shoe, is that there is not an external or a fabricated fake support in the shoe because the muscles are too weak.
Exactly. And now another con of barefoot shoes is that your foot muscles may not just be weak, but they actually may be atrophied to the point that like you don't have enough padding on the bottoms of your feet. And so when you walk on certain surfaces, essentially anything but a thick, plush carpeted floor, it hurts your feet because there's not enough padding on the bottom of the feet. Well, that padding largely comes from your muscles, okay? The stronger and the thicker your muscles are on the bottoms of your feet, the less it's going to feel like you're walking on all the little bones of your feet. Walking on your bones doesn't feel good. Like if you've ever, it's funny, like sometimes I'll get on the floor and I'll try like crawling around, on my hands and knees with the kids. And I tell you, like when my kneecaps or patellas are like directly on the floor, that's super uncomfortable. So like that like body weight right on top of bone, right on top of the floor, that's really uncomfortable. And so if you've lost a lot of the padding in your feet because the muscles of your feet have atrophied to the point that they are very thin, then having, a barefoot shoe, that's not going to be a pleasant experience for you because you don't have enough kind of padding within your foot in order to be able to more than likely comfortably tolerate doing things in the shoe, just doing things in your life. So if you're finding that that's the case for you, then, barefoot shoes really may not be the best option for you.
The next thing that is a big con for barefoot shoes is that you might have too much muscle dysfunction or movement dysfunction in your feet. You might say, well, Julie and Charlie, I do calf raises all the time. I even do like foot exercises. So you might think your feet are really strong. But sometimes things are just not functioning properly to feel good or to feel productive to wear a barefoot shoe. It's kind of like saying like, hey, well, you have strong enough hips to walk around every day, but you might still have hip pain, right? That means there's dysfunction in the hip. We're not saying just because your feet might be strong, there still might be dysfunction or compensation happening in the feet, causing problems with supporting the arches from the muscles or supporting the micro movements. I call them micro movements, even though they're like the full movements in the foot. It's just the foot's kind of smaller than your leg, or your arm or whatever. But anyways, the movements of the foot. So we need the strength, but we also need the proper function happening in the foot.
Exactly. And another consideration along those lines is your feet may be too inflamed. You might be having plantar fasciitis going on. There may be neuromas or something like that happening with your feet. that if you put them right into a barefoot shoe, the stress of not having that external support may be too much and just maybe making that entire situation worse for you. And so that's something to be considered. That's something to consider as well when thinking about what kind of shoe wear do you want. Is like, all right, well, what's going on with your feet? Not from a muscle function and joint function perspective, but also from like an inflammation perspective. Like, are you having these aches and pains, plantar fasciitis? Do you have neuromas? Do you have other things going on with your feet that if you are barefoot, being barefoot is going to be too much stress and ultimately making those things worse?
Our last big point on the cons list for wearing barefoot shoes is that the accompanying joints of your body may be in a place that cannot support barefoot shoe wearing, meaning your ankles, your knees, your hips, your core, your trunk, everything above your foot may not be in the right function and strength and condition to handle supporting your foot. What do we mean by that? We know that how your hips, your knees, all the other joints, how they're functioning and how they're moving and or not moving has a direct influence on how your foot is going to move. And that can either really support your foot or it can really stress out your foot and make it so that it doesn't feel good to have a barefoot shoe on. So that would be the last piece. And I can't even tell you the amount of times where people come in with foot issues, plantar fasciitis, or bunions, and instead of working on their feet, I'm like, I don't know, I just see all this muscle dysfunction in your hips. And we work on their hips and their feet completely change. So there is a very direct relationship between the two. So we want to see that your body is functioning properly so that your feet can function properly and feel good and feel productive in a barefoot shoe.
Exactly. So here's a very simple example. If your ankle does not dorsiflex, or meaning you're not able to point your foot up, enough to be able to get it flat, every single time you stand wearing barefoot shoes, you are going to be forced into more dorsiflexion than what you have, because the barefoot shoes don't have that heel pitch that so many people are accustomed to. The heel pitch, what it does is it lifts the heel up, so it puts you in a little bit of plantar flexion. It takes you out of dorsiflexion, okay? And so for whatever reason your ankle doesn't have the mobility, if the muscle function of your ankle dorsiflexors isn't there to be able to move your foot into the requisite amount of ankle dorsiflexion, well, just simply then by wearing the barefoot shoes and not having that little bit of a heel pitch or a lot of bit of a heel pitch, however much you are used to, that's going to start to stress out your ankle. That's going to start to stress out the muscles that would perform ankle dorsiflexion. That would likely start to stress out the feet. That would likely start to stress out the knees and all the way up the body, just simply because the ankle is in the muscles that control the ankle are not functioning well. When you change your shoe wear, now all of a sudden it's going to create issues throughout the entire body. So the bottom line from a cons or considerations perspective is everything that we listed, when you add barefoot shoes to the picture, it ends up leading to more stress. It ends up leading to more dysfunction, and ultimately ends up leading to more issues throughout your entire body, not just at your feet, your ankles, your knees, your hips, into your back, possibly your shoulders, possibly your neck. Using this tool in a barefoot shoe that is supposed to be really good because, like you were saying at the beginning, Julie, it's supposed to allow your foot to move how it quote unquote naturally moves. But because your feet may be too weak, your muscles may be too atrophied, there may be too much muscle or joint dysfunction going on, there may be too much inflammation in the feet going on, or the rest of the joints in the body are not functioning well enough to be able to tolerate it. Now all of a sudden this thing that could be really good all of a sudden becomes a negative type of stress. But here's the thing. The flip side can also be true with the shoes that are super supportive, that are super stiff, and considered, these are the good shoes for your feet. In fact, for me in particular, I know anytime that I wear those type of shoes, they wreck my body. They absolutely, without question, wreck my body. My ankles, my knees, my SI joints, my hips, my low back feel trashed wearing those other types of shoes because of how much restriction they put on my feet. And I grew up wearing those type of really stiff and supportive shoes. Basketball shoes are notorious for being really stiff and really supportive. And I got to tell you, one of the best things that I did for my body was progress the health, the strength, and the function of my feet to be able to tolerate wearing barefoot shoes. Because when I first started trying to wear barefoot shoes, I could only do it for like 5 minutes at a time. And then I had to go back to wearing my regular shoes. So right now we want to transition into talking about, okay, if you are in that position where you're like, I feel like I should be, wanting to wear or I have some desire to wear these barefoot shoes, but I don't think I could do it right now. We want to talk about how to go about progressing your system to be able to do just that.
Right. So the first step is get MAT. Just get MAT. There is so much muscle dysfunction happening in everyone's foot because of how we live our life, wearing crazy shoes, mostly for fashion, not for function. And this produces a lot of muscle inhibition that's going to be very, very, very difficult to strengthen with traditional type exercise. You do so many millions of exercises, ones that are on the internet, corrective ones, all the best ones. But if it's on inhibited muscles, they are going to struggle to receive that information to know to get stronger. So the first step is go find your local MAT specialist. We test over 50 individual muscles just in the foot and ankle alone. And I gotta tell you, I've never seen someone come in with like really high functioning feet. So we can get you there, but it's really uncommon if you've never gotten MAT that most of your muscles in your feet are working properly.
Absolutely. MAT definitely is the first step in this whole series, because if you jump right to step 2, you're going to be building strength and function on a dysfunctional system and a dysfunctional foundation. So first and foremost, we got to improve the function of the muscles of your feet, and you do that with muscle activation techniques. Once you improve that function, then you can start incorporating more traditional exercises for your feet. Things where you are working on the strength and function of your toes, of making an arch, of collapsing an arch, ant-tib raises, calf raises, everything like that. Now all of a sudden those exercises can actually have substantial value to building the health and function of all the muscles of your feet, instead of just the ones that are already holding on for dear life, while the majority of the muscles of your feet are dysfunctional and not working well, okay? So step 1, get MAT to get everything up to par. Number 2, start building upon that, doing more traditional exercises for your feet.
Step 3 is going to be to start gradually progressing your shoes. Now, this is kind of a crazy thought for a lot of people, but if you were, for example, if you were interested in starting to run, you would realize it would be crazy for a coach to say, great, let's start day 1 with a marathon. You would be totally like, what? I'm trying to get to a marathon. I can maybe run for 1 minute right now, So we want to progress your shoes like you're progressing a training program. So if you look at your current shoes, like for example, I used to wear the most pronator shoes of ever. Like they were like literal bricks because I had very severe plantar fasciitis. And so if you look at that shoe, it barely bends. It's very, very thick on the bottom. It has really, really high arch supports. It really cups your foot into a very specific position. And so the next progress from that would be maybe finding a shoe that has a little bit more flexibility in it, meaning you hold it up and it moves a little bit more. Or maybe you find a shoe that has a little bit less of an arch support offering, or less of that buildup in the foot, like the pitch Charlie was talking about, where your heel is much higher than your toe. So pick one thing to progress and offer that to your foot. And that's how you want to think about progressing your shoe. You don't want to go from a really stiff shoe all the way down to like the toe shoes or the barefoot shoes right away. You want to think of progression, because remember, your foot still needs support. We're just trying to teach your muscles to do the supporting rather than using the shoe for support.
Exactly. Step 4 is to start microdosing your barefoot exposure, okay? A lot of times when I talk to clients about starting to be barefoot more, we automatically jump to these extreme situations where we're spending all day barefoot, or we're going for walks barefoot, or we're working out barefoot. It's like, no, what if you actually just stood barefoot for like 30 seconds? And they're like, is that even going to do anything? I said, well, it's more time than you're spending barefoot right now. And I think that would be like a really good first step.
Yeah.
Like if you can handle 30 seconds, then we can check that off the list, and then we can go to 45 seconds or a minute. Because at some point you're going to find that line of, well, I don't know that I could stand for 7 hours barefoot, but I could do 30 seconds. It's like, okay, cool. So let's do 30 seconds and do 30 seconds for a few days. And then maybe bump up to a minute or 2 minutes. And then maybe after a month or so, you find that, hey, yeah, I'm able to spend 20 or 30 minutes a day being barefoot, doing different stuff. I'm not like exerting myself really hard, but I'm just around my house barefoot. And maybe after 6 months, you find that you can be, barefoot for a few hours. And maybe a year from now, you find that, yeah, I can spend the majority of my day barefoot. And yeah, it took a year, but guess what? That year is going to pass anyways. So you might as well pass it in a way that you are progressing towards something that you want to do, which if you want to be able to spend more time barefoot, if you're trying to progress into using barefoot shoes, then you have to start with what you can do. And if what you can do right now is 30 seconds, and 30 seconds is what you can do without it wrecking the entire rest of your body, where you're feeling achy and sore through the rest of your body, or it's hurting your feet or anything like that, then start with 30 seconds. And then just build up from there and understand that this is going to be a long-term play, a long-term approach, but it's what is necessary to get you to where you want to go.
That's right. And the last thing that we want you to do when progressing towards a more barefoot approach is total body strength training. Just like we talked about previously, all the joints and muscles of your body do either apply stress to your feet or will support your feet. And so having a really strong rest of your body has a very direct role in how your feet are able to handle barefoot. And remember, we're on our feet, like most people, a lot of times a day, taking 5,000 to 10,000 steps. So your body does have to be in good shape. You want to make sure that you're strengthening, you're challenging your body, you're building the conditioning of each and every joint above your feet.
Exactly. So here's the thing. In an ideal world, we would all be able to wear barefoot shoes without issue. All right? We don't come into this world wearing shoes. Shoes are something that we are put into the majority of the world, but not all the world. And so here's the thing, though, is most people, or many people, are not able to, wear barefoot shoes without issue. And that's completely fine. All right? There's no judgment around it. There's no like, oh, you should be able to do this. It's just like, in an ideal world, your muscles would be strong enough and be functioning well enough, and the rest of your body would be able to tolerate doing it, especially if that's something you want to do. But because many people cannot do that, we need to kind of progress ourselves to that, again, if that is something you want to do. So here's the thing. Instead of forcing the issue of just going out, buying a pair of barefoot shoes and being like, all right, these are the shoes I'm wearing, I'm just going to, mentally get myself through it for the rest of forever. You want to be able to progress your feet, the strength, the function, the tolerance of your feet and of the rest of your body, to be able to tolerate the stress of, being barefoot, of having to hold up your body, of having to walk, of having, to, if you're going to try running barefoot or whatever it is that you're wanting to do barefoot, that's going to be a stress on your system. Just like anything with exercise, just like anything physical that you are trying to do, you want to be able to build the tolerance up, not only of your feet, but of the rest of your body to that more and more. Increasing the strength and function of your feet, first using MAT and then starting to do more traditional strengthening for the feet and of the entire rest of your body is going to be key to helping you do just that. So if you are in the Chicagoland area or are willing to travel to the Chicagoland area and want to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself, that is our specialty here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We are so grateful and fortunate to have people from all over the world travel to see us here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. And so again, if you're in our area or are willing to travel to our area to get your feet assessed and start improving the function of the muscles of your feet, we would love to see you for that. All you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule for your initial consultation and assessment is go to www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, there's a big green button that you can click that says Get Started, and you can book yourself right there into our schedules. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is interested in learning more, trying out barefoot shoes, but isn't really sure if it's right for them? Share this episode with them so they can get our takes on the pros and potential cons of using barefoot shoes and understand how to progress themselves into being able to use barefoot shoes without issues. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us and leave us a rating and review. Not only does it help people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise, it helps them find our podcast when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.